When I arrived for the family summer trip, my son-in-law told me, "You're not going. You're a disgrace to the family." I smiled. "All right, have fun." The next week, when they came back and realized I had changed the locks on the house, he called me 67 times, but I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lawrence and I'm 72 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, sitting in my own living room, finally understanding what it means to stand up for yourself after a lifetime of being pushed around by people who should love you most. It started on a Tuesday morning in July. I remember the date because I'd been looking forward to it for months. July 15th, the day we were supposed to leave for our annual summer family trip to Lake Tahoe. I'd packed my bags 3 days early, even bought new fishing gear because my grandson Tommy loves fishing with Grandpa. At least I thought he did. I was loading my suitcase into my old pickup truck when Melvin's black BMW pulled into my driveway. My son-in-law stepped out, wearing those expensive sunglasses he never takes off and that smirk I've grown to hate over the past 5 years since he married my daughter, Chloe. "Morning, Lawrence," he said, not even bothering to help me with my bag. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Chloe climbed out of the passenger seat, avoiding my eyes. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her purse strap the way she used to do as a child when she knew she'd done something wrong. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my suitcase down on the gravel. Melvin adjusted his tie. Who wears a tie to go on vacation? And looked me up and down like I was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. "Lawrence, we've been talking, and we've decided you're not coming on this trip." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward. "What do you mean I'm not coming? We planned this months ago. I already paid for my cabin rental." "Yeah, about that," Melvin said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through it casually, like he was discussing the weather. "We're going to need you to cancel that. Actually, we already did. You'll get most of your money back." I looked at Chloe, waiting for her to say something, anything. She was my daughter, my only child. Surely she wouldn't let her husband treat me like this. But she just stood there, staring at the ground. "Chloe," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Honey, what's this about?" She finally looked up, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Embarrassment. Not for her husband's behavior, but for me. "Dad, we just think it would be better if you stayed home this year," she said quietly. "You know how you get sometimes." "How I get?" I wanted to ask what she meant, but Melvin jumped in before I could speak. "Look, Lawrence, let's be honest here. You're not exactly vacation material anymore. Last year you complained about the food, you went to bed at 8 o'clock every night, and you spent most of the time talking about your medications and doctor appointments. It's depressing." Each word was like a knife twisting in my chest. "That's not. I don't. And frankly," Melvin continued, warming to his theme, "it's embarrassing. We're trying to have a good time with our friends, and having you there just brings down the whole mood. You're 72 years old, Lawrence. Act like it." I felt my face burning with shame and anger. Behind Melvin, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door pretending to water her flowers while obviously listening to every word. This wasn't just rejection. This was public humiliation. "Melvin, that's enough," Chloe said, but her voice was weak, half-hearted. "No, Chloe, it's not enough. Your father needs to understand his place in this family. We're not running a nursing home here. We're young, we're successful, and we want to enjoy our vacation without having to worry about whether Grandpa remembered to take his blood pressure pills." The worst part wasn't Melvin's cruelty. I'd grown used to that over the years. The worst part was watching my daughter nod along with him. My Chloe, the little girl who used to climb into my lap and beg me to read her the same bedtime story over and over again. The teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young woman who walked down the aisle holding my arm, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," just before I handed her over to this monster. "You don't need us anyway," Melvin said, getting back into his car. "You've got your TV shows and your crossword puzzles. That's enough excitement for someone your age." I stood there in my driveway, holding my suitcase, watching them drive away. Mrs. Patterson had given up any pretense of watering her flowers and was openly staring now. I could see the pity in her eyes, and it made everything worse. I forced myself to smile and wave at her. "Change of plans," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Decided to stay home and work on the garden instead." She nodded sympathetically and went back inside, but I knew she'd be on the phone within 5 minutes, telling everyone in the neighborhood how that awful son-in-law of mine had humiliated me in broad daylight. I picked up my suitcase and walked back into my house, the house where I'd lived for 43 years, where I'd raised Chloe after her mother died, where I'd thought I'd spend my final years surrounded by family who loved me. The silence was deafening. I set my suitcase down in the hallway and looked around at the family photos covering the walls. Pictures of Chloe's graduation, her wedding, holidays we'd spent together. In every single photo, I was smiling. When had I stopped being welcome in my own family? I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. The calendar on the refrigerator was marked with a big red circle around July 15th through 22nd. Lake Tahoe trip, written in Chloe's handwriting. She'd seemed so excited when we planned it. Or maybe she was just good at pretending. Sitting at my kitchen table, I tried to remember when things had changed. When had Melvin's casual rudeness turned into open contempt? When had Chloe stopped defending me and started seeing me as a burden? Maybe it was when I'd had that small heart episode last year and they'd had to cut their anniversary dinner short to take me to the hospital. Or maybe it was when I'd asked them to help me figure out my new smartphone and Melvin had sighed like I'd asked him to perform brain surgery. Or maybe it was simply the fact that I was getting older, moving slower, needing more help with things I used to do easily. But as I sat there in my empty house, something strange happened. The initial shock and hurt began to transform into something else entirely, something colder and more determined. I wasn't just embarrassed anymore. I wasn't just sad. I was angry. Really, truly angry for the first time in years. They thought I was just a helpless old man who would accept whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. They were about to learn just how wrong they could be. The first day alone was the hardest. I kept expecting the phone to ring, kept thinking maybe Chloe would call to apologize, maybe say they'd changed their minds and were coming back to get me. But my phone stayed silent, and by evening I realized they weren't coming back. They were probably at the lake by now, toasting their successful vacation without the old man dragging them down. I tried to keep busy. I mowed the lawn, even though it didn't really need it. I organized my tool shed, arranged my fishing tackle, cleaned out closets that hadn't been touched in months. But every activity reminded me of the trip I wasn't on, the family that didn't want me. On the second day, something shifted. I was sitting in my study looking through old photo albums when I came across a folder I hadn't opened in years. It was filled with papers from when Martha, my late wife, had died 8 years ago. Legal documents, insurance papers, financial records. That's when I found it, the deed to the house. I'd forgotten some of the details from when Martha and I first bought this place 43 years ago. Back then, it was just a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet street, nothing special. But as I read through the documents, several things became crystal clear. First, the house was in my name only. Martha and I had structured it that way for tax reasons back in 1980. Second, the property had increased in value dramatically over the decades. What we'd paid $47,000 for was now worth close to $800,000, according to the latest tax assessment. But there was something else in those papers that made my hands tremble as I read it. A letter from a law firm dated just 6 months ago, addressed to me but opened and resealed. I didn't remember receiving it, but then again, Melvin often picked up my mail when I was having one of my bad days with my arthritis. The letter was from Morrison, Patterson and Associates, informing me that there had been inquiries about my property. Someone had been asking questions about zoning laws, about whether the land could be subdivided, about what permits would be needed for development. The letter specifically mentioned that these inquiries had come from family members acting on behalf of the property owner. I read that line 3 times before it sank in. Family members, acting on my behalf, without my knowledge. I set the letter down and tried to think. When had Melvin started being so interested in my house? When had he started making comments about how big it was for just one person? How I might be happier in a nice senior living community? The answer came to me like a slap in the face. It was right after his real estate development company had gone through that rough patch last year. Right after he'd been complaining about cash flow problems and delayed projects. Right around the time he'd started being extra nice to me, offering to help with my finances, suggesting I might want to simplify my life. I walked through my house with new eyes, seeing it not as the family home where I'd raised my daughter, but as Melvin saw it, as an asset to be liquidated. $800,000 sitting on prime real estate that could probably be subdivided into 3 lots, each worth $400,000 or more to a developer. The pieces were falling into place and I didn't like the picture they were forming. I spent the next 2 days going through every document in my study, every piece of mail from the past year. What I found made my blood run cold. There were more letters from law firms, all opened and resealed. There were property assessments I'd never seen. There was even a preliminary survey of my land that I definitely hadn't authorized. But the worst discovery came when I called my bank to check on something unrelated. The customer service representative mentioned that someone had been asking questions about my accounts, about what would happen to my assets if I became incapacitated. "Your son-in-law said you'd asked him to help manage your affairs," the young woman on the phone said cheerfully. "He seemed very concerned about making sure everything was properly organized for you." I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking with rage. Melvin hadn't just been planning to exclude me from family vacations. He'd been planning to exclude me from my own life. That evening, I called a locksmith. "I need all my locks changed," I told him. "Tomorrow, while I'm out." "Any particular reason?" he asked. "Break in or something?" "Something like that," I said. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought 3 security cameras, the kind that connect to your phone so you can monitor your property remotely. I wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but the 19-year-old clerk was patient and showed me how to set them up. "You'll be able to see everything that happens around your house," he explained, positioning the cameras to cover my driveway, front door, and backyard. "The motion detection will send alerts right to your phone." As I watched him work, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control. For too long, I'd been passive, letting other people make decisions about my life, but not anymore. That afternoon, while the locksmith finished installing new deadbolts and a security chain, I sat in my kitchen and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a list of every way Melvin had been undermining me, every sign I'd missed or ignored. The way he always answered for me when people asked how I was doing. The way he'd started handling my mail and my doctor's appointments. The way he'd convinced Chloe that I was getting confused and needed more help with daily tasks. The way he'd gradually isolated me from my friends, suggesting that I was too tired for social activities, too fragile for a normal interaction. I'd been so grateful to have someone taking an interest in my welfare that I'd completely missed what was really happening. Melvin wasn't helping me. He was positioning himself to take over my life. As the sun set on my 5th day alone, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee and watched the security camera's red lights blink steadily. My new locks gleamed on the front door. My phone was ready to alert me if anyone approached my property. I wasn't the helpless old man Melvin thought I was. I wasn't the burden Chloe saw when she looked at me. I was Lawrence Mitchell, and this was my house, my property, my life. And I was about to remind my family that some mistakes have consequences they never saw coming. The vacation would be over in 3 days. When Melvin and Chloe came back expecting to find the same pushover they'd left behind, they were going to get the surprise of their lives. On the 6th day, I decided to do something I should have done years ago. I called my lawyer. Harold Weinstein had been our family attorney since 1992. He'd handled Martha's will, helped us with some property disputes over the years, and had always been straight with me. If anyone would know what Melvin had been up to, it would be Harold. "Lawrence," his voice was warm when I reached him at his office. "How are you doing? I haven't heard from you in months." "I'm fine, Harold, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone contacted you about my property or my financial affairs recently?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "What do you mean exactly?" "I mean, has my son-in-law Melvin Rogers been asking questions about my house, my will, anything like that?" Another pause. "Lawrence, maybe you should come in and we can discuss this in person." That pause told me everything I needed to know. "Harold, just answer me straight. What has he been asking about?" Harold sighed deeply. "He came to see me about 3 months ago. Said he was concerned about your mental state, that you were becoming forgetful and confused. He wanted to know about establishing power of attorney, about what options existed if you became unable to manage your own affairs." My blood ran cold. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that any such arrangements would require your explicit consent and a thorough medical evaluation. I also told him that from my perspective, you seemed perfectly capable of managing your own affairs." "Did he mention anything about my property, about selling the house?" "He did ask about the process for selling real estate on behalf of someone with diminished capacity. He seemed particularly interested in what documentation would be required." I gripped the phone tighter. "Harold, I want you to know that I have never authorized Melvin to act on my behalf in any capacity. I am not suffering from dementia or any other mental impairment, and I certainly have no intention of selling my house." "I'm glad to hear that, Lawrence. To be honest, something about his visit didn't sit right with me. That's why I sent you that letter asking you to call me. What letter? The one I sent 6 weeks ago asking you to contact me to discuss some concerns about your estate planning. I felt sick. Harold, I never received that letter. That's concerning. Lawrence, I think you need to come in right away. There are some things we need to discuss. An hour later, I was sitting in Harold's office, and what he told me made me understand that Melvin's plans were far worse than I'd imagined. 3 weeks after Melvin's first visit, Harold explained, spreading documents across his desk, I received a call from a real estate developer named Carson Industries. They wanted to know about the zoning status of your property, whether it could be subdivided, what the process would be for getting development permits, and when I asked how they'd gotten my name as your attorney, they said your son-in-law had provided my contact information. They said he'd told them you were interested in selling and developing the land. I stared at the papers Harold was showing me. Official inquiries, preliminary development studies, even architectural sketches for a proposed subdivision of my property into 4 lots. Lawrence, according to these documents, someone has been representing themselves as acting on your behalf for months. They've had surveyors on your property. They've applied for preliminary zoning variances. They've even gotten estimates for demolition of your house. Demolition? The word came out as a whisper. Harold nodded grimly. The development plan calls for tearing down your house and building 4 new homes, each valued at approximately $600,000. The total project value would be around $2.4 million. I felt dizzy. But they can't do any of this without my signature, right? Not legally, no, but Lawrence, there's something else. I did some research after Melvin's visit, and I found something troubling. He's been telling people around town that you're suffering from early-stage dementia. He's been laying the groundwork to challenge your mental competency. What does that mean? It means that if he could get a doctor to support his claims about your mental state, he could potentially petition the court for guardianship. As your guardian, he would have the legal authority to make decisions about your property and finances. The room felt like it was spinning. Can he do that? And only if he can prove you're incompetent, which from everything I can see, you absolutely are not. But the fact that he's been preparing for this possibility tells me he's been planning this for a very long time. Harold pulled out another file. I made some calls to colleagues in the real estate field. Carson Industries has been shopping around for properties exactly like yours. Older homes on large lots that can be subdivided. Your property is perfect for their business model. How much are we talking about? Based on current market values and the development potential, your property could be worth anywhere from $1.2 to $1.8 million to a developer. That's assuming they can get the zoning variances and permits. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. So Melvin's been setting me up to be declared incompetent so he can sell my house to developers for nearly $2 million. That appears to be the plan, yes. And Chloe, does she know about this? Harold's expression was sympathetic but firm. Lawrence, according to the preliminary paperwork I've seen, Chloe is listed as a co-beneficiary on the proposed development deal. If this sale went through, she and Melvin would split the proceeds. My daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd raised alone after her mother died, she was in on it. There's more, Harold said gently. I contacted your doctor's office to ask about any recent evaluations. According to Dr. Peterson's nurse, Melvin has been calling regularly, asking about your mental state, requesting copies of your medical records. He told them he was concerned about my memory, my decision-making ability. He even suggested that you might need to be evaluated for Alzheimer's disease. I thought about all the times Melvin had insisted on coming with me to doctor's appointments, how he'd started answering questions for me, how he'd suggested to the doctor that I seemed confused or forgetful. He's been building a case, I said. Exactly. And if you hadn't called me today, if you hadn't started asking questions, he might have succeeded. Harold leaned forward. Lawrence, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Has Melvin ever had access to your mail, your financial documents, any legal papers? I thought about all the times he'd offered to help me organize my paperwork, all the times he'd volunteered to pick up my mail when my arthritis was acting up. Yes, I said quietly. He's had access to everything. Harold made notes on his legal pad. We need to assume he's seen everything. Your will, your insurance policies, your bank statements, your property documents. He knows exactly what you're worth and exactly how to go about taking it. As I drove home from Harold's office, my mind was reeling. The humiliation at the summer trip wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. By isolating me from family activities, by treating me like I was senile and incompetent, Melvin was creating a narrative that would support his legal challenge to my mental capacity. Every time he'd made me feel stupid or confused, every time he'd answered for me or suggested I was having one of my episodes, he was building evidence for his case. The summer trip itself was probably part of the plan. Get me out of the picture for a week while he finalized paperwork, met with developers, maybe even moved forward with some of the legal proceedings. But now I knew the truth, and Melvin had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. There were fresh tire tracks in my backyard leading to the area near my property line. Someone had been on my land while I was gone. I checked my security cameras, and there it was, clear footage of a surveyor's truck parked in my yard just 2 hours ago. 2 men in hard hats had been measuring and marking my property, taking photos, making notes. They thought I was at Lake Tahoe. They thought they had a free week to do whatever they wanted on my property. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The first call came at 7:38 on Sunday morning. I was sitting on my front porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, when my phone started buzzing. Melvin's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 3 minutes later, then a third. By the fourth call, I was actually enjoying myself. I could picture him standing in the driveway of whatever fancy lake house they'd rented, staring at my front door with those new locks gleaming in the morning sun. On the fifth call, I decided to answer. "Hello, Melvin." "Lawrence, what the hell is going on? We can't get into the house." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's because I changed the locks." "You what? Why would you do that?" "Oh, I think you know exactly why." There was a pause. I could hear Chloe's voice in the background, high and anxious, asking what was happening. "Lawrence, this is ridiculous. Open the door. We're tired, we have luggage, and Chloe needs to use the bathroom. I'm sure there's a gas station down the road. Don't be childish. Let us in right now." The tone of command in his voice, the same tone he'd used to exclude me from the vacation, made something snap inside me. "No. What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, Melvin. You're not coming in. None of you are." "Lawrence, this is my wife's childhood home. You can't just lock us out." "Actually, I can. See, this is my house. My name is on the deed. My name alone. And I decide who gets to come in." I could hear him breathing heavily, trying to control his temper. "Look, I know you're upset about the vacation thing, but we can talk about this like adults. Open the door. We are talking like adults. I'm talking like an adult who knows you've been planning to steal my house." The silence that followed was telling. Too long. Too complete. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally, but his voice had changed. Less commanding, more careful. "Carson Industries ring a bell? Morrison, Patterson and Associates? Preliminary development studies?" Another silence, longer this time. "Lawrence, I think you're confused. Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson. Have him come take a look at you." And there it was. The play he'd been preparing for months. The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent, that I needed medical intervention. "Actually, Melvin, I've already talked to Dr. Peterson, and to Harold Weinstein, and to the bank." Interesting what you learn when you start asking the right questions. You don't understand what you're talking about. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been telling people I have dementia. I understand that you've been meeting with developers about my property. I understand that you've been planning to have me declared incompetent so you can sell my house and pocket almost $2 million. Chloe's voice in the background became more urgent. I could hear her asking Melvin what I was talking about. "Lawrence, you're clearly having some kind of episode. We need to get you help." "The only episode I'm having is a moment of clarity. For the first time in years, I can see exactly what you've been doing." My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then another. Melvin was calling and texting simultaneously now, clearly panicking. "Dad, please." Chloe's voice came through the phone. Melvin had obviously handed it to her. "We're your family. We just want to come home." "Chloe, honey, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Did you know that your husband has been meeting with real estate developers about selling this house?" "What? No, that's not." Melvin wouldn't. "Did you know that he's been telling people around town that I have Alzheimer's disease?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "Did you know that there are architectural plans to tear down this house and build 4 new houses on this lot?" "That's impossible. Melvin would never." "Ask him, Chloe. Ask him right now. if he's been planning to sell this house. I could hear muffled conversation, raised voices, Chloe demanding answers from her husband. Then Melvin was back on the phone, and his voice was different now, colder, more desperate. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. I have copies of all the paperwork, Melvin. All the inquiries you made using my name, all the meetings you had with developers, all the medical records you tried to access. I have everything. You're bluffing, am I? Call Harold Weinstein. Ask him what we discussed yesterday. The phone went quiet for a long moment. Then I heard Chloe's voice again, but this time she was yelling at Melvin, demanding to know what I was talking about. Lawrence, Melvin's voice was tight now, controlled but barely. You need to think about what you're doing. This affects Chloe too. This affects your grandson. My grandson? You mean Tommy, who you told me couldn't come fishing with me anymore because I was too old and slow? That grandson? You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Call number 37 came at 10:15. By then, I'd stopped answering altogether. I was too busy enjoying the show my security cameras were providing. I watched Melvin pace back and forth in my driveway, phone pressed to his ear, making call after call. I watched Chloe sit on my front steps with her head in her hands. I watched them argue, really argue, for what appeared to be the first time in their marriage. Around noon, a police car pulled up. I'd been expecting this. Officer Martinez was young and polite. Mr. Mitchell, we got a call about a family dispute. Your son-in-law says you've locked them out of their home. Officer, this is my home. My name is on the deed, and I have every right to decide who enters my property. Sir, I understand, but they say you're not thinking clearly, that you might need medical attention. I handed him a business card. That's my lawyer's number, Harold Weinstein. If you have any questions about my mental capacity or my legal rights, I suggest you call him. The officer looked at the card, then back at me. Sir, do you understand what's happening here? Your family is concerned about you. Officer Martinez, my family spent a week at Lake Tahoe without me because they said I was an embarrassment. During that week, they had surveyors on my property without my permission, continuing a months-long plan to force me to sell my house. Now they want me to let them back in so they can continue manipulating me. Does that sound like family concern to you? The officer glanced toward the driveway, where Melvin was still pacing and making phone calls. I'm going to need to see some documentation, he said. 20 minutes later, after reviewing my property deed, my driver's license, and speaking briefly with Harold Weinstein on the phone, Officer Martinez was back at my door. Mr. Mitchell, everything appears to be in order. This is your property, and you have the right to determine who has access to it. From my window, I watched him explain this to Melvin, whose face turned an alarming shade of red. Call 67 came at 6:43 that evening. By then, Melvin's voice had taken on an edge of panic that I found deeply satisfying. Lawrence, you're destroying this family. You're destroying Chloe's marriage. No, Melvin. You destroyed this family when you decided to steal from me. I never stole anything. Planning to have me declared incompetent so you can sell my house isn't theft. That money would have gone to Chloe eventually anyway. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. So, you admit you were planning to sell my house? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. And now Chloe knows it too. As the sun set on what should have been the last day of their vacation, I sat on my porch and watched them drive away. Not to a hotel. I'd called around and confirmed that every decent place was booked solid for the summer season. They'd probably have to drive 2 hours to find a room. My phone had finally stopped ringing. Melvin had given up, at least for now, but I knew this wasn't over. Men like Melvin don't give up when there's nearly $2 million at stake. He'd regroup, find another angle, maybe try to turn this around on me somehow. What he didn't realize was that I was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in years, I was thinking 3 steps ahead instead of just reacting to whatever was done to me. The old Lawrence would have caved by now, would have opened the door and apologized for causing trouble. But the old Lawrence was gone, and the new one was just getting started. The confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure came 3 days later. I was tending to my tomato plants in the backyard when I heard the familiar sound of Chloe's car pulling into the driveway. But this time, she was alone. I watched through my kitchen window as she sat in her car for several minutes, clearly working up the courage to approach the house. When she finally got out, I could see that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, Her usually perfect makeup was gone, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I met her at the front door but didn't open it immediately. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Can we talk? Please? Where's Melvin?" He's staying at his brother's place. We had a fight, a big one." I studied her face through the glass. This wasn't the confident, dismissive woman who had stood silently while her husband humiliated me a week ago. This was my little girl, the one who used to come to me when she was scared or confused. I opened the door. She stepped inside tentatively, looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. "You really did change all the locks." "I did. And those security cameras are new." "They are." She nodded slowly, taking in the implications. "Dad, I need to know something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did Melvin really try to steal the house?" I led her to the living room, the same room where I'd found all those legal documents that had started this whole revelation. "Sit down, honey. We need to have a conversation we should have had a long time ago." For the next hour, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The meetings with developers, the inquiries about my mental competency, the preliminary architectural plans, the attempts to access my medical and financial records. I showed her copies of all the documents Harold had gathered, explained the timeline of Melvin's deception. Chloe listened in silence, her face growing paler with each new revelation. "He told me you were getting confused," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said you were showing signs of dementia, that we needed to start making decisions for you. And you believed him. He showed me things, times when you forgot appointments, when you seemed disoriented. He said it was just going to get worse." "What kinds of things?" "Like when you called me 3 times in one day asking about the same doctor's appointment, or when you couldn't remember our conversation about Thanksgiving plans." He said these were warning signs. I felt my stomach turn. "Chloe, I never called you 3 times about a doctor's appointment, and we never had a conversation about Thanksgiving plans." She looked confused. "But Melvin said." "Melvin lied. He's been lying to you for months, maybe longer. That's impossible. Why would he lie about something like that?" I pulled out the folder with the development plans and spread them across the coffee table, because this house is worth $1.8 million to a developer. And if he could convince everyone that I was incompetent, he could sell it and keep the money. Chloe stared at the architectural drawings, her hands shaking. "These show our house being torn down. 4 new houses in its place. Melvin would make enough money to pay off all his business debts and still have over $1 million left over." His business debts? I realized she didn't even know about that part. "Honey, Melvin's company has been struggling for over a year. He owes money to suppliers, contractors, investors. I think this house was his way out." She was quiet for a long time, studying the papers. "He's been different lately, more stressed, more controlling. He keeps checking his phone, taking calls at weird hours. I thought it was just work pressure." "When did he start suggesting that I might need help managing my affairs?" "About 6 months ago, right after." She paused, thinking. "Right after that meeting with his accountant. He came home really upset that day, said there were some financial issues they needed to work through. And that's when he started being concerned about my mental health?" "Yes. He said we needed to start thinking about the future, about what would happen when you couldn't take care of yourself anymore." I watched understanding dawn on her face, followed immediately by horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dad, what have I done?" "You trusted your husband. That's not a crime, Chloe. But I chose him over you. When he said you were becoming difficult, when he suggested you might be happier somewhere with more support, I went along with it. I actually thought he was being thoughtful." "What did he tell you about the summer trip?" "He said you'd been talking about how tired you were, how you weren't sure you were up for traveling anymore. He said it might be better to let you rest, that the activities would be too much for you." "And you believed that?" Tears started flowing down her cheeks. I wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting that my husband was being cruel to my father. It was easier than standing up to him. She looked around the living room, at all the family photos, the furniture that had been there since she was a child. "He's been planning to take this away from you, all of it, every memory, every piece of our family history. The house is just a building, Chloe. What matters is the family. But I'm not even sure I have a family anymore." When I confronted Melvin about what you told me, he didn't deny it. He said I was being naive, that you were going to end up in a nursing home eventually anyway, that this way at least we'd have something to show for all the years of dealing with your problems. He said that? He said worse things. He said you were a burden, that you'd been dragging us down for years. He said I needed to choose between him and you, and that if I chose you, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I felt a surge of anger, but also something else. Relief. Finally, Chloe was seeing Melvin for who he really was. What did you tell him? I told him I needed time to think. But Dad, I'm scared. If I leave him, if I divorce him, he'll try to take Tommy away from me. He's already threatened to fight for custody. Said he could prove I'm an unfit mother because I'm emotionally unstable. Honey, look at me. You are not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. But what if he's right? What if I am unfit? I let him convince me that my own father was losing his mind. What kind of daughter does that? A daughter who was being manipulated by someone she trusted. Chloe, Melvin is very good at what he does. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. He knew exactly how to isolate me from you. How to make you doubt your own judgment. She wiped her eyes with a tissue I handed her. I keep thinking about all the times he answered for you when people asked how you were doing. All the times he suggested you were too tired for family activities. I thought he was being protective. He was being strategic. And the worst part is, I can see now how much it hurt you. Every time I went along with his suggestions, every time I didn't defend you, I was telling you that I agreed with him. Chloe, you couldn't have known, but I should have. You're my father. I should have trusted you over him. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. When you changed the locks, when you refused to let us in, were you punishing me? Or were you protecting yourself? I considered the question carefully. Both, I think. But mostly I was protecting myself. For the first time in years, I was putting my own well-being first. I'm glad you did. If you hadn't, if you just let us back in and pretended nothing had happened, Melvin would have kept going with his plan. I never would have known the truth. What happens now? Chloe took a deep breath. Now I have to figure out how to rebuild my life, and I have to figure out how to protect Tommy from all of this. You don't have to figure it out alone. You'd help me after everything I've done? Chloe, you're my daughter. That hasn't changed, no matter what Melvin tried to make you believe. She broke down crying then, really crying, and for the first time in years, she let me hold her while she sobbed. She felt small in my arms, like the little girl who used to come to me when she'd had a nightmare. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, and I forgive you. How can you forgive me so easily? Because you're here now. Because you chose to come here and face the truth instead of hiding from it. As the evening grew darker, we talked about practical things. Where she and Tommy would live, how to handle the divorce proceedings, what evidence we had of Melvin's deception. But mostly we talked about healing, about rebuilding trust, about becoming a family again. When she finally left that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for myself, but for us. For the possibility that sometimes even the deepest betrayals could be overcome if people were willing to face the truth and do the hard work of forgiveness. 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen making pancakes when I heard the familiar sound of small feet running down the hallway. Tommy burst through the kitchen door, still in his pajamas, grinning from ear to ear. "Grandpa, you said we could go fishing today." "After breakfast, buddy," I said, flipping a pancake in the air and catching it perfectly in the pan. Tommy cheered like I'd just performed a magic trick. Chloe appeared in the doorway, looking more rested than I'd seen her in years. Her divorce had been finalized 2 months ago, and while it had been difficult, she'd emerged stronger and more independent than I'd ever imagined she could be. "Dad, you don't have to make breakfast for us every weekend," she said, but she was smiling as she said it. "I want to. Besides, it's the least I can do for my tenants." Converting my house into a duplex had been Harold's idea. By adding a separate entrance and a small kitchen to the upstairs area, I'd been able to create a comfortable apartment for Chloe and Tommy while maintaining my own space downstairs. It gave them independence while keeping family close. "Any word from Melvin's lawyer?" I asked as Chloe poured herself coffee. "Nothing new. He's still fighting the custody arrangement, but his lawyer says it's mostly posturing. The evidence of his financial manipulation pretty much destroyed any credibility he had with the judge. The legal proceedings had been more complicated than I'd expected, but also more satisfying. When Harold presented all the documentation of Melvin's scheme to steal my property, it had opened the door for Chloe's divorce attorney to investigate his other financial dealings. What they'd found was worse than any of us had imagined. Melvin hadn't just been planning to steal my house. He'd been embezzling money from his own business partners, hiding assets from creditors, and falsifying documents for months. The judge wasn't impressed when she found out he'd been planning to have his wife's father declared incompetent for financial gain, Chloe said, settling at the kitchen table, especially when the psychological evaluation showed you're sharper than most people half your age. That evaluation had been one of the most satisfying moments of the entire ordeal. Dr. Sarah Chen, the court-appointed psychologist, had spent 3 hours with me, conducting cognitive tests, reviewing my medical history, and interviewing people who knew me well. Her report had been unequivocal. I showed no signs of cognitive decline or mental incompetency. In fact, she'd noted that my decision to investigate Melvin's suspicious behavior and take protective action demonstrated excellent judgment and mental acuity. "Tommy, eat your pancakes before they get cold," Chloe said. But our 8-year-old grandson was too excited about the fishing trip to focus on breakfast. "Grandpa, do you think we'll catch a big fish today?" "I think we'll catch whatever fish are smart enough to want to meet us," I said, which made him giggle. Watching Tommy laugh, seeing him comfortable and happy in what was now his home, I felt a satisfaction that went deeper than mere vindication. Melvin's plan hadn't just been to steal my house, it had been to steal my family, to isolate me from the people I loved most. Instead, his greed and deception had brought Chloe and Tommy closer to me than they'd been in years. "Dad, I have something to tell you," Chloe said, and something in her tone made me look up from the stove. "What's that?" "I got the promotion. Senior nurse practitioner at the children's hospital." "Chloe, that's wonderful. The salary increase means we can start looking for our own place again. I know this arrangement was supposed to be temporary." I set down my spatula and turned to face her. "Is that what you want? Your own place? I want whatever's best for Tommy, and for you. What's best for me is having my family close by. What's best for Tommy is stability and knowing he's loved. If you want your own place, I'll support that completely. But if you're thinking about moving because you feel like you're imposing, don't." Tommy looked back and forth between us, sensing the serious nature of the conversation. "Are we going to move away from Grandpa?" he asked, his voice small. "Would you want to move away?" Chloe asked him. "No, I like living with Grandpa. He makes the best pancakes and he knows all the good fishing spots and he helps me with my homework without getting frustrated like." He trailed off, but we all knew he'd been about to say like Daddy. Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then we stay, if you're sure you don't mind." "Mind? Honey, this house has been too quiet for too many years. Having you and Tommy here makes it feel like a home again." After breakfast, while Tommy ran upstairs to get dressed for our fishing expedition, Chloe and I sat on the back porch with our coffee. "Sometimes I can't believe how different everything is," she said, looking out over the yard where Tommy's bike and soccer ball were scattered across the grass. "Different how?" 6 months ago, I was married to a man who was planning to steal from my father. I was so isolated from you that I didn't even know who you really were anymore. I thought I was living this perfect life, but it was all built on lies. And now I'm a single mother living in my childhood bedroom, and I've never been happier." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The tension that had been constant in her face for years was gone. She looked younger, more relaxed, more like the Chloe I remembered from before Melvin. "You know what I realized?" she said. "What's that?" "Melvin spent so much energy convincing me that you were becoming a burden, that you needed to be managed and controlled, but you were never the problem. You were the solution. I'm not sure I follow. When my marriage fell apart, where did I go? When I needed help figuring out how to rebuild my life, who did I turn to? When Tommy needed stability and love, who provided it?" She gestured toward the house, toward the life we'd built together over the past 6 months. You were always the answer, Dad. Melvin just made sure I couldn't see it." Tommy came thundering down the stairs, dressed in his fishing clothes and carrying the tackle box I'd given him for his birthday. "I'm ready. Can we go now, please?" "Let me get my gear," I said, standing up with only a slight wince from my arthritis. As we loaded the car with fishing poles and a cooler full of sandwiches, I thought about how much had changed since that humiliating day when Melvin had told me I wasn't welcome on the family vacation. Back then, I'd felt like I was becoming irrelevant, like I was slowly being pushed out of my own family. I'd started to believe that maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a burden they had to tolerate. Now I knew better. I wasn't a burden. I was a grandfather teaching his grandson to fish. I wasn't irrelevant. I was a father helping his daughter rebuild her life. I wasn't being pushed out. I was the foundation that held everything together. Grandpa, do you think Mom could come fishing with us sometime? Tommy asked as we drove toward the lake. I think that's a great idea. What do you think, Chloe? I think I'd like that very much. As we pulled into the parking area at the lake, I saw other families setting up for their own fishing expeditions. Fathers and sons, grandfathers and grandchildren, whole families working together to untangle lines and bait hooks. 6 months ago, I'd thought my family was falling apart. I'd thought I was losing the people I loved most. Instead, I'd found something better than what I'd lost. I'd found a family built on honesty instead of manipulation, on respect instead of control, on love instead of obligation. Tommy ran ahead to claim a good spot on the dock while Chloe and I gathered our gear. Dad, she said as we walked toward the water. Yeah, thank you. For what? For fighting back. For not just accepting what Melvin tried to do to us, for showing me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I put my arm around her shoulders, something I hadn't been able to do in years. Thank you for coming home. As we joined Tommy on the dock, I realized that Melvin had been wrong about almost everything. He'd been wrong about my mental capacity, wrong about my ability to fight back, wrong about Chloe's loyalty. But he'd been right about one thing. This story did end with someone getting everything they wanted. It just wasn't him. Standing there with my daughter and grandson, watching Tommy cast his line into the sparkling water, I had everything I'd ever really wanted. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Not a family based on appearances and expectations, but one built on truth and love. Melvin had tried to steal my house, but in the end, he'd given me something far more valuable. He'd given me my family back, and that was worth more than any amount of money he could have made from tearing down my home. The old Lawrence would have been grateful just to be included, just to be tolerated. But this Lawrence, the one who'd learned to fight for what mattered, this Lawrence was truly free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.